change is happening. I call it the ground floor revolution is happening. And that's whether you want it or not.
Thank you so much for listening to Urbanistica podcast. I am Mustafa Sharif, an urban planner, and you're more than welcome to join my big journey of exploring the making of smarter and more livable cities. Please don't forget to follow Urbanistica on the different social media platforms, and also let's connect on LinkedIn. Big thanks to Urbanistica podcast partner AFRI. AFRI is an international engineering and design company providing sustainable solutions in the fields of energy, industry, and infrastructure. Are you ready for a new episode? Let's go for it.
I'm really happy to invite my guest to the podcast. So, hey, and welcome Conrad Kickert to Urbanistica podcast.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having me.
My pleasure. How are you doing?
I'm doing well. Thank you very much. Starting teaching and it's going well. Thank you.
That's awesome. So tell us, where are you now? How is it going with the COVID? And what time is it now also, by the way?
It's 9:07 in the morning. I'm in Buffalo, New York. So that's near the Niagara Falls. Snowy, but not too snowy. And in terms of COVID, I think things are going pretty well. They were really bad, obviously, in the United States, but it seems like cases are going down. I don't really know why, but vaccinations are going comparably quite well in the United States. I know more and more people, not me yet, but I know more and more people that are getting a vaccine. Yeah.
Okay, that's nice. So are you starting, I guess you're teaching digitally, right?
Yes, that's correct. Yeah, I'm teaching everything online, unfortunately.
Yeah. Do you miss the university?
Oh yeah. Although I will say, I think online teaching has been going better than expected.
Cool.
Yeah, but maybe my expectations were low.
So well. they are not sleeping, the students.
No, not at all. If anything, I'm teaching. Last year, I taught a lecture series. I recorded the lecture. Thought that would be awful. The students actually really, the students actually really enjoyed that because they can play it in their own time. The discussion groups went pretty well, and even Studio, which I really thought, man, is this going to work? Even Studio has not been going terribly. What about that? No, I think it's actually been going quite well. Motivation is always an issue, right? I mean, for students just to stare at a screen instead of being in the room, being able to scribble. But, technology has gone more further and further. If you think of Zoom, you can annotate screens and stuff. It's actually not too bad for collaboration. Yeah. But hey, I think we'll all be happy when we're back in person.
Yeah, I agree with you. So you are our storyteller for this episode. So how would you like to introduce yourself, and please tell us about your passion?
Sure. So as I've said in my hello, I am Conrad Kickert. I am an urban designer by nature. I have a bit of a varied background. I did my undergraduate in architecture in the Netherlands, where I grew up. But have a graduate degree in urbanism, also in the Netherlands. Somehow, in the meantime, I did a year exchange program in Michigan in the United States in urban design. And then after that, I did a PhD back in architecture, also in Michigan, then taught at the School of Planning in Cincinnati for 6 years. And now I'm back at an architecture school. So let's say I go between territories quite a bit. In terms of passion, from very early age onward, I just loved mapping, making maps, imagining cities as well. So, from my early teenage years on, I would just draw maps of imaginary cities. Believe it or not, I would start with a small town until a whole region spread throughout the floor. And just imagining my own cities. I still draw maps now, but more as a scholar. So for instance, the map of Detroit that you can see in the video recording, I've recently finished a book on the history of downtown Detroit, which features a lot of beautiful maps, which of course I
Yeah,
really enjoyed making.
that's lovely. Do you remember your first map? Or that was a long time ago?
That was a long time ago. As I said, I mean, I was a kid just making these maps, closing my eyes and thinking, oh, of all the urban environments that I could imagine, all the ones I've been to in the past, and just recreating them, recombining them into new worlds, which really is what urban designers still do today. And
Yeah.
they even get paid for it, so it's great.
That's true. I also I'm doing like I draw a map of every city that I visit.
Oh, that's great.
I'm collecting them, and also it feels like it's not, I will not call it an illness, but like you're addicted to map, to draw
Yes,
maps.
yeah. It's not an illness at all, 'cause why would it be? It's a passion. That's exactly as you
That's
say,
true.
which is a good thing. Which is a good thing. Yeah.
Yeah. Tell us now, where are you working? What do you do?
Okay. So I am at the University at Buffalo, which is part of the State University System of New York. As I mentioned, Buffalo is in the northwest corner of the state of New York, so it's close to the Niagara Falls, quite close to Toronto as well, further away from New York City than you would imagine.
Mm.
Um, and I teach in the architecture school at this university. But I do teach as an urban designer. I kind of go both ways. So, for instance, I'm currently teaching a class on storefronts for undergraduate environmental design students, which are sort of between architecture and planning. Um, and I teach a small seminar in urban design in the architecture school to architects. And that's kind of how my teaching and scholarship has been anyway, kind of between both worlds, right? So sometimes I work in architecture, sometimes I work in urban planning. And I think that's partially coming from my tradition. There's not that much difference in urbanism, as I would call it, between the two fields. It's far more pronounced in the United States, the sort of difference between the two professions than it is in Europe. So I'm fairly happy traversing between the two worlds.
It's also cool to see you working with your passion.
Yes, absolutely.
That's lovely. That's
Yes,
lovely.
yeah.
So now tell me your story of how did you get in touch with the Center of the Future Places here in Stockholm? You're far away.
I'm far away. This is a long story. So I um, I was at Michigan for my 1 year exchange program in urban design, and I met Tigran Haas over there. He was also, like me, a visitor. Tigran was a visiting sort of scholar. He did research. I was a student, essentially. And I think we had good conversations back there. Um, and you know how it goes with friendships, right? You don't talk to one another for a couple of years, and then you meet each other after a couple of years, saying, "Hey, it's nice to catch up with you." And this happened during my PhD at Michigan, where I talked to Tigran again, and in those years that have went in between, Tigran started running the Center for the Future of Places, and he said, "Why don't you become more involved? Your research is very interesting." And one very, very cold winter, I was invited over to Stockholm to talk about my research as well. And I also discussed with him and with other people at the research center my research on frontages, ground floor frontages, which is become my recent passion. So much of our urban experience happens at eye level,
Yeah,
right? So this is where a lot of my research recently has gone towards. And the center is quite excited, quite pleased about that. So we started a research collaboration, various articles, and now an upcoming book as well on frontages. Yeah.
nice. So which year was it when you met Tigran and then when you came here to Stockholm?
The first year I met Tigran was back in 2005.
Whoa,
Yeah, I
really
know.
long time ago.
Long, I know. It sounds terrible, right? Like, yeah, it's long. It feels like yesterday. It feels like yesterday. But yes, a long time ago. And then, yeah, that's a good question. When I could look back, it feels again like yesterday that I was in Stockholm talking about my research. But I would say a good 6 years ago again, to when I
Yeah.
really formally became part of the research center. Yeah.
So yeah, you mentioned you wrote articles, and I guess now you're writing a book.
Yes,
as
that's
well,
correct. Yeah.
which is the street level architecture.
Yep.
Can you tell us about the background of this book, why you're writing it?
Absolutely. So, you know, this background, it goes a little ways back. Is I graduated in urbanism and started work in the United Kingdom in consultancy. And one of the first questions that came up during work was, what makes for a good city? And specifically, what makes good for a good city center? Um, which is a very, very broad question. So I
This
started
is
researching.
the $1 million question, right?
It's the £1 million question, right, for the United Kingdom,
Yeah.
and very, very broad question. So I started to do my research, thinking, okay, how am I going to tackle this? A lot of writing in urban design is on public space, right? So a lot of stuff happens on the ground. But what I notice is, so much of our experience is not just on the ground, the way that a street is allocated to traffic and to sidewalks, to bicycles, um, but also on the first floor of a building or the ground floor of a building. In fact, the fact that I can say first floor and ground floor says how unrecognized territory this is. The first floor, I always forget, I think it's first floor in the United States and ground floor in the United Kingdom. So we don't even have a word for it. But it's so important to our recognition of places and our experience of places, totally, totally unexplored. So worked in consultancy and then started a PhD thinking that's the gap, that's the knowledge gap that I want to study. This unexplored first 3 meters or 10 feet of our experience of the city. And that's what I started my dissertation on at the University of Michigan, effectively building a data set of two cities, mapping again, right? Loving the maps. A data set of two cities, The Hague in the Netherlands, which is the city I grew up in, a very representative city for many city changes in the Netherlands, and then Detroit, Michigan, which is in some sad ways representative for some of the issues that are facing American cities, looked at their downtown and said, how has the ground floor of buildings changed over a 100-year time period? Which was zen, but fun to do, with, combining maps with phone books, essentially, business records, to see what was happening in ground floors, and then drawing quite a few conclusions from that. So, for instance, finding that large urban design projects in general are not too friendly to ground floors, but also seeing how architecture has changed on the ground floor, but very much seeing stuff that was new to me. So, for instance, the massive, massive role of the ground floor economy. Usually, when I say frontages, people are like, "Oh, you mean shops?" I'm like, it's a little more than just shops. But yes, indeed, if you looked at the deactivation of ground floors over the past century, it really was mostly just shops disappearing, which then made me quite fascinated. It's like, okay, what's going on with all these shops? Like, what is the world of shops? What is the dynamics of these shops? So after my dissertation was finished in November 2014, shops became a bigger and bigger part of my research. Really looking not so much in urban design, the design world where I came from, but actually making let's call it excursions to other fields like economy or economists. What is the economy of ground floors, and can we say much about that? So increasingly, my research became involved with retail, which actually has become the topic of a couple of these articles that I've written with the center as well. So using that giant database that I had of where shops are, for instance, proving through statistical research that the more shops you have in one cluster, the more likely they are to stay open, which is totally normal when you think about it. Is shops survive in a cluster, right? You want to have a couple of them next door to one another so that you can walk in between. There's proximity. It allows them to compete properly as well. But no one had really proven that kind of stuff. And then another article that recently came out on, can we see how the location of shops in the urban structure also influences if they stay open or if they close. Meaning, are they on well-connected streets? Does that mean they stay open longer? They're less susceptible to going out of business. The answer is yes. Are they very central in the city? Do they stay open? Yes, also as well. So it's kind of interesting to use this database that started out with making very, very pretty maps and really going deeper, diving deeper into this. And this is where this book story comes in. Is okay, now there's very quantitative articles full of statistics that describe shops, but I wanted to also keep my eye on the bigger picture, which is it's not just about shops, it's about our complete eye level experience. And the more I started talking to people, the more people said, yeah, it's unexplored. I have no idea. What are these dynamics of the ground floor beyond just shops? So I said to myself, as stubborn and perhaps a little naive as I am, well, I have The Hague in the Netherlands, lovely town. I have Detroit in Michigan, which has its fair share of issues. And I got some criticism as well. They said, well, you're just the Dutchman that's trying to show that everything is nicer, right, in the Netherlands. I said, okay, fine. I'll show to you a terrible city where things have gone really wrong in Europe. And where else did I find them? Birmingham, England. I said, okay, fine. I'll show you Birmingham, England, which is a town that has drawn freeways through its urban core, terrible modernist architecture, and then faced with very unfortunate urban decline as well. So if you look at the ground floor, it's just completely declined. And then I said, there are North American cities that are doing really, really well. So for instance, Vancouver in Canada has kind of gone through a rough time in the 60s and 70s, but then really climbed up and has very good guidelines on how to make lively frontages, active ground floors. So I'm gonna add those two cities as well, which effectively doubled my dissertation research. Thank God, and this is also through support of the center. I was able to hire assistants to help me with some of those maps. As fun as they are to make, they take forever. And we made all these maps, and then pitched a book to Routledge, to the publisher, saying, look, I'm going to show you how ground floors have changed over a 100-year period of time, but I'm also going to collaborate with a practitioner, Hans Gassenberg, an urbanist at Stipo in Amsterdam, to also give you ideas on, okay, what can we do now? So I've shown you how stuff has gone downhill. I show you that it's not just architecture, it's not just urban design. If anything, mostly it's these larger forces behind architecture and urban design, like the economy, changing political regimes. Think of technology, right? The rise of the car, for instance, huge, huge impact. And I'm going to show you in various chapters also on what to do now. So you're currently writing this book, writing chapters on retail. So what are the dynamics of retail and what are ways to bring shops back? But increasingly starting to realize, especially for instance now, right, during the COVID era, is how can we have other uses for storefronts as well that are not retail? And I think this is going to become a huge, huge question coming up into the future. Uses like small offices, maker spaces, community spaces like libraries, spaces for the arts, lots of other things that a ground floor can do that still makes city life nice, but that isn't necessarily commercial. You can, by the way, none of these, or not all of these are just losing money. These can still be perfectly viable uses, but they're not the type of thing that you think, right? They're not a shop. They're not a shop. So that will be a chapter. We'll have a chapter on ground floor residential. How do we live on the ground floor? Because believe it or not, most of the ground floors that we currently have, people live on them, right? They have a little front yard. They have a window that perhaps you can look into, perhaps you cannot. So looking at the dynamics of that as well, how people inhabit the ground floor. And then also chapter on, okay, there are things in the ground floor that you just need that aren't going to be super interesting or active. You're going to have some parking. You're going to have some manufacturing. You're going to have office spaces. how can we make these still interesting? How can we make these at least respect the pedestrian passerby? So the chapters like that. So it's on one hand very deep scientific insights, on the other hand very practical lessons of what we can now do with all these spaces. So books in progress. It's going well, and yeah, it's always hard to say when it comes out, but soon. What about that? It'll come out soon.
When when is your plan to publish, or when is the deadline?
Uh, the deadline, the deadline had passed. So let's say, as with any good book writing, it's a little behind schedule, not much behind schedule. It's a great question on when is it actually on the shelf, because the time between when I hand it in and when it actually is on the shelf, there's quite a bit of time in between that. So, for instance, this is an example. I wrote that book on the history of downtown Detroit using some of my insights from Detroit, and that was a long process. And luckily it's a history book. History can wait a little bit, but I can expect this being on the shelf not far before 2022.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But okay, so you mentioned that it's not only urban design or architecture, but more also economy and retail. Was
Yeah.
it difficult for you to get in this field of economy, numbers, retail, making profit, or how did you explore this?
I like exploring. I think we can learn by expanding horizons. Was it easy? No. You have to look for a whole different type of world, a whole different type of publication, a different type of scholarship. But if it were easy, I always say someone else would have done it, right? So I think it's so important for us as urbanists in general to be those generalists. You have to understand the stuff that guides you, and to also understand that the design improvements that you make are the result of and influence larger forces that you do kind of need to understand. I can design a most beautiful transparent ground floor of a building and a whole street long, and there might not be a single shop that shows up because I didn't understand the dynamics of the shops that go in there. So I found it a very, very worthwhile excursion. And in fact, Mustafa, to explain is how important these excursions are, is I'm recently finishing an edited book, also for the Research Center with Emily Talon, called Street Life, Dynamics and Prospects for Urban Retail, which has a ton of authors coming from all sorts of different fields, from sociology, from economy, yes, also from design, from real estate, super important real estate as well. And this is going to be a book just on urban retail, mostly because people keep asking, oh, frontages, that must be shops, right? Okay, let's talk about shops, because I think it's one of the key questions in cities. And I'm a little stunned sometimes to see how little thought has been given by urbanists, which means that you hand it over to developers, to retailers to decide the eye-level experience of your city. Well, why shouldn't we be involved in this discussion as well? It's giving away a lot of control and power that I think we deserve to have to shape the urban experience, because we know experience. We just have to understand the underlying dynamics of that experience as well. So, no, I like these excursions.
Do you think we are not having this knowledge is because like university not integrating this kind of subjects within the, what do you call it, urban design path? Or why do you think we are giving it away?
Yeah, I think you are right. Urban design, which there's nothing wrong with that, is a physical profession in and of itself, right? Like, it tries to be physically focused. I feel in both, by the way, in the United States and in Europe, it aligns closest with the design professions. But I've been really happy and fascinated that in the US for 6 years, I taught urban design in a planning school, which is much broader. they look at these broader patterns. They look at these broader forces, and I've actually been very happy to take that broader view approach, right? So in my teaching in urban design, I've actually had quite a few readings that were not about urban design at all. I said, okay, let's read a little bit about retail dynamics. And students get it soon enough, saying, oh, so if I design something, people won't just show up. I said, no, no, of course not. So to look at these broader dynamics. And I think you can, even in Europe, you can see schools that really get that. So when I think of UCL, the research that they do, for instance, in space syntax, and to be honest, also in Sweden at KTH, the research that people are doing, they get it. They understand that the configuration of a city involves the economy first and then design. And hey, even if we think of some of our most popular urban designers today, Jan Gehl, it's city life first and building second. He understands that you first need to look at the bigger picture. You need to understand what guides life, which is as much sociology, economy, psychology, and then we start designing for that. So this broader perspective, I think, is on the rise. It's on the rise.
Yeah. And I would love to ask you, going back to one of your chapters, talking about we don't need maybe to have a commercial activities in every ground floors. But the question here, because we are facing almost the same, maybe it's in Scandinavia, but I think worldwide as well. Do the land owners make profit of not having a commercial activities there? Like, okay, having a library or what do you call it? Something else like community meetings hub. Do I make money by having this?
So I'm increasingly getting involved in the real estate dynamics of these things. And you're right, a lot of this is about money. There's some really, really weird stuff going on when you talk about money and ground floors. So for instance, all these vacant storefronts that are happening throughout the world, a lot of this has to do, strangely enough, and this is another excursion, with fiscal policy, with taxation. So in New York, for years and years, there's now been this big debate. All these stores are empty. Why are they empty? Other than the shops aren't there and the rents are too high, there's also the fact that as an owner, you can leave your storefront empty and you will lose some money, but the storefront is still in your books at a retail value, which is very high. If you take your losses and you say, maybe I cut the rent and then a shop comes in, or even worse, I cut the rent a lot and then an office comes in, which tends to pay much lower rent than a retailer, my total value of that storefront, of that, perhaps even the whole building that it's in, really goes down quite a lot. And I have loans at the bank, and how am I, the bank is going to come back to me saying, okay, could you please pay me the difference? Instead, especially in cities like New York, you can just leave it empty and you can write off the losses from an empty storefront as a tax loss. Like, oh, well, oops, it's still a very valuable, property, but it's just a loss. It's just this year, it's vacant, but next year, surely something will happen. So what you see is these values are propped up. These tax breaks essentially help vacancy. And cities like New York are really, really discussing, let's end this. Let's have a penalty on leaving your storefronts vacant. The United Kingdom has been a complete leader in this. They said years ago, after the Great Recession, had all these vacant storefronts. They said, look, we're gonna tax that. We're gonna force owners to do something. Because you get a 3-month grace period and you can sit empty for 3 months because sometimes there's just your shop just went out of business or something. After 3 months, we're gonna punish you. And what that means is owners have been far more open, of course, forced to be open to other uses. So they're open to, for instance, temporary shops and pop-up shops, and increasingly also open to post-retail uses as well, including offices, libraries, and the various obvious contender is dwellings, is living. And the crazy thing you now see in some cities is there's such a housing shortage. Homes are so expensive and shops are doing so poorly that it actually becomes more profitable for owners, especially in sort of these peripheral shopping streets where rents are low anyway, to transform their shops into homes. That's a good and a bad thing. Again, if you look at the UK, they've deregulated that. It partially has to do with their current government ideology, or it's very deregulation focused ideology. So now all of a sudden, left and right throughout these high streets in the UK, oh, this shop has just become a house. And do you want to live on the main street of a town? That's that kind of make for lousy homes as well, right? So there's a lot of thought that needs to go into this that isn't being done yet. So I hope you can hear from my stories. There's so much stuff that we just don't know yet. And this is another research project that I'm working on, is a scientific journal. Let's get some people together and talk about some of this stuff. What is the real estate dimension? But what is the design dimension? How do we design a nice house that goes into a former shop? How do we design a nice office that goes into these shops? Think about, for instance, co-working spaces. A huge, huge opportunity post-COVID as people work from home and they get really sick of it as well, right? And they say, okay, I'll go into a co-working space. And yes, there is also a need for spaces for cultural expression, for the arts. We just need to rethink what our city centers are for. They're not going to be for buying stuff anymore. If you want to buy stuff, especially boring stuff, you just click a button and it shows up on your doorstep. Thank God, But you're still, by the way, you're still going to see shops as places that you want to go. So there's
I think
shift.
we also I would love also to talk with you about the future. But before that, so from city life point of view, vibrant city, commercial functions makes more life in the city, or the other mixed function makes more life in the city, like non-commercial functions? Did you understand my question?
Yeah, I completely understand your question. It is something that I am grappling with. Needless to say, we have both been raised by the fact that a city center was for commerce. You go there to shop, and shopping means a lot of people show up and they go in and they go out of a shop, and that's life. I think throughout our lifetime, we have already seen that life can be a little bigger than that. For instance, I've seen the tremendous transition from shops to bars and restaurants, right? So now all of a sudden people pay a pretty penny to go sit in a room with people they don't really know. And this is all, of course, before COVID, right? With people they don't really know, and to eat something or to drink something. And you have to remember, in the Netherlands, that was not normal at all when I was a kid. There were bars and restaurants, but now there are bars and restaurants and coffee houses all over the place. Coffee shops, of course, we already had. That's a whole different story. So people now go to a downtown just to meet, not to buy something and to walk home with a bag of something. No, they walk home with a good memory, or a filled stomach with some good food or a good cup of coffee. So the notion of what happens on the ground floor is already changing. That said, bars and restaurants I have high hopes for, right? I think after COVID, we have such a pent-up demand to meet other people, to see strangers again, right? So I think other than an economic recession, which will be hard for bars and restaurants, I think in the long run they'll do just fine. But they're not going to fill up everything. They're not going to fill up all these empty storefronts. It just doesn't work like that. So whether they bring more life or not, there's going to have to be other uses, and we better think of how these other uses make life. Let's put it that way. So if we put a house where a shop used to be, let's think of ways of how to make this house as sociable as possible, to make sure that the resident of that house has a positive image to public space and uses public space, makes public space their own. And there's a lot of lessons there that are already out there, how homes can help public space versus hurt public space. Same goes for offices. We can learn, and we have examples of how offices can be nice to streets as well. They don't have to be awful. They don't have to draw the blinds immediately. They can actually be quite enlivening. Think of the functions of an office. It's not just working at a little desk and concentrating. A lot of it now has become collaborating to talk, well, like I'm talking to you right now. Some of these functions are actually quite public, quite open. You can move those to the front of a building and actually make them open to the street. Think of meeting your clients. There's an increasing cohort of small businesses and freelance workers, and we can talk if that's good or bad, but these people are there. Think of they need to meet clients. They currently meet them in coffee shops. What if we make spaces for that on the street? So instead of saying, here's this loss of life from all these shops that have gone away, we can cry about that day and night. Let's focus on the future. Let's see how these other uses can be as good, maybe even better than the shops that replace them.
Yeah. Take us to the future. Tell us, how do you, I don't know if I say imagine or predict the future of retail.
If I knew the future, I'd be what do we call it, a billionaire. It'd be Jeff Bezos. But there's a couple of things. There's a couple of things that I think we can very reasonably assume. And many of these things, in terms of pure retail, which is a shop where you buy stuff, has actually been going on, and COVID only accelerated them. So we have already seen for years and years the shift of shops, of places to buy stuff that you really need, to places to experience things. So think about books in the 1990s. You had to go, if you wanted to read a book or buy a book, you had to go to a bookstore, go in, browse some books, not too long, or the store owner would get angry, and then buy something. Bezos was smart. Was he a book person? A little bit, but he kind of understood this is one industry that's really easy to disrupt, because I can get the information about books. It's far easier to do online. Same goes for music. The same, I can get information about music. Remember, you have to go to a record store and then put the record on, and then put headphones on and listen. Is this any good? Yeah, okay, I'll buy it. I'll buy the CD or the vinyl or the cassette, whatever. So the purchasing process is shifting. And this was one of my excursions to the field of marketing, is how do people buy stuff? They need some information, and then they ultimately make a decision. And for some of these things, information is far easier done online. Think also of electronics, another market where all the shops are going out of business. It's so much easier to go read a bunch of reviews on Amazon or on whichever site you have to make you feel comfortable about buying something that is usually pretty expensive. Remember that you have to go into a shop, and then you have to ask a shop employees, well, is this a good pair of headphones or a good TV? They would say, yes, sir, of course, it is really, really great. You would never really trust them, right? They're like, yeah, you're just trying to sell me something. So these businesses are shifting. And what you see is there is still value in a physical shop. And that is where the information that you need about a product can only be given physically. So think, for instance, to get back to Scandinavia, about Bang & Olufsen. Bang & Olufsen, beautiful brand, right? And they sound good, but they also look good, and they're kind of expensive. So you probably want to go and see them first before you buy them. A beautiful pair of headphones or a beautiful speaker or something like that. And also, very importantly, you want to hear them because it's really expensive. So Bang & Olufsen has these experience centers. They're a shop, and they don't care if you buy your headphones in the shop or you go back home and you buy them from someone else. You still bought a Bang & Olufsen pair of headphones, right? Apple is the same way. They know that their laptops are kind of pricey. You want to touch them first. You want to see, are they heavy? Are they light? Do they feel good? How do these really, really expensive headphones, how do they sound good? The iPhone, it's also not cheap stuff. Does it work well? So they've set up their shops as experience centers, not as places to sell. Again, they don't care. Do you want to go back home and think about it for a bit and then go to apple.com or whichever shop you want to use to buy an app? You still bought a Mac and you still bought an iPhone. They don't care. So shops are going, pure shops are going very much toward experience. And shops that don't offer experience, they're toast. They're done, because you can get the same stuff online. One exception is convenience. Think of, I'm baking cookies and I just forgot I ran out of butter. Okay, well, that's something that you need nearby. So what the retail world sees is this experience on the one hand, convenience on the other hand, those are still stable industries. Everything that is in between is in deep, deep trouble. Even the grocery market, which is long seen as sort of, oh, that'll never go online. Well, guess what? COVID is now disrupting that market. People used to be scared of buying, an apple online, and now they've had to try it every once in a while because of terrible lockdowns. And they say, oh, it's not so bad. It's not too bad. This, by the way, is very problematic. Groceries are very, very, and this is all the stuff that I've learned over the past couple of years. Groceries are very expensive to deliver online because someone has to pick them, and then that has to be cool because otherwise your apples are disgusting, and they have to show up on your doorstep, and you kind of want them very soon as well. Very expensive to do. So what this means is we're going to see this massive disruption in the grocery world. And because it's so expensive, the only people that can pay for this disruption, the only people that will come out winning are the people that have, or the companies that have a lot of money to spend on it. So that worries me. It means that the small grocery store around your corner, they'll probably survive because you need the pint of milk right now. But sort of those mid-sized grocery stores, they're not your national chains that have billions to throw at this order fulfillment and last mile delivery. They have a big problem. So that landscape will also very much shift. So that's a couple of things that you see. There again, we have experiential groceries. You go to the market because that's so cool. Or you go to ethnic stores because that's so interesting as well. You go to what in the US has become very popular, food halls, where there's sort of a hybrid between you can bring some stuff home and you can eat it right there. People love consuming on site, right? Because then they can see other people and the site becomes as cool as the product. So you see that. Then we have, as I mentioned, the sort of the summit of experience is food service, which is bars and restaurants and coffee shops and lunchrooms and stuff. Those before COVID were absolutely booming. To the surprise, I think, of many cities, like, man, people are really willing to pay a premium to just have a good time, really, to just have a good time, have some good food, see some other people. They pay for social life, which, by the way, is kind of a good thing. People are willing to pay to be in the city, to be in social life, to see other citizens, which makes me very hopeful about the post-COVID era. So those have filled up a lot of storefronts also. So you see some, how do we call it, some losers and some winners in this. But what worries me in the COVID and post-COVID era is the winners are no longer going to be making up for the losers. Like every shop, electronic shop that went out of business might have become this cool bar. I don't think we're going to see that equilibrium anymore. So now we need to go and think, okay, this shop will really never be selling stuff meaning goods or coffee or beer or anything. Now what? So
Yeah.
We'll see.
Yeah. And I would love to ask you now, you mentioned the experience and retail, the future of retail. So what do we as, let's say, urban designers, architects need to pay attention?
It's a very good question. I think you need to pay attention to flexibility, because what I have seen, first of all, I've studied this over 100-year time period in my own research. It's the only thing you can see is that stuff keeps changing all the time. And what you see is these buildings that are inflexible, or these street settings that are inflexible. Well, I can promise you one thing, in 20 or 30 years, you have a problem, because history has caught up with you. If you think, for instance, in the United States, the shopping malls, very single function something, a building that was completely designed, to the max for one function, to make you spend as much money as possible. Those are failing left and right because they are hard to transition into another function. Who wants to go live in a mall? Who wants to go work in a mall? They're trying, trust me, but in general, it involves significant alteration or complete demolition of these malls for something else, for more mixed-use settings. So hedge your bets, be flexible. I think you can see at the architectural level, if you want to transition to more experiential uses, yes, that has repercussions for your ground floor design as well. In architecture, for instance, you can see how floor plates get a little shallower so more people can enjoy the street. Right? You don't want these really deep units anymore because you want to sit at a bar, you want to sit all the way in the back and not being able to see anything. No, so we see these more shallower, deeper, or shallower uses that have more street frontage, which is great, by the way, right? There's more activation. At the urban level, think of the tremendous change toward outdoor seating. This was already happening before COVID, patios, people like to sit outdoors and have a beer or a cup of coffee or something. And now, of course, because of our social distancing guidelines, it has just taken the world by storm. Is people have to sit outside. Sitting inside is dangerous. So parking space is being turned into patios. You can see that becoming more and more permanent. Again, it's in a good way and a bad way. Imagine people living upstairs. Are they overly happy that now there's a patio outdoors where people are going to have a beer until 11 or midnight or something? Probably not. So we're going to see new clashes. We're going to see a new allocation of space to make way for these businesses. And we're going to see pushback. We're going to see conflict in that as well. Think also, for instance, of every parklet that takes away a parking spot. Some other business is going to say, you took my parking spot. Think of, for instance, the old guard versus the new guard, the bars and restaurants that say, oh yeah, no, you shouldn't be driving to my bar anyway. So I want to take up all the parking for patio space, versus the shops that say, no, my customers are coming in by car and you've just taken away all my parking spots. There's going to be those types of discussions in public space as well. But flexibility, man, flexibility over anything
Is the key.
is the key, is the absolute key. Yeah.
Yeah. Yes. I love it. And thank you so much for sharing all your knowledge with us. And I'm really looking forward to read your book.
Thanks.
And now I'm wondering, who are you targeting with your book? Like, who's the reader? I guess it's not only urban planners and architects.
No, certainly not. So that is certainly a key audience. The book, after all, is street level architecture. So architects, I hope, will read it. It's a mixture. So it's a mix between the traditional designers. I hope that they understand and they get lessons from this. But there's so many more people that shape our eye level experience. So I see this book being read by developers, by retailers as well, by policymakers, by building owners as well, asset managers. They're like, okay, well, what am I going to do with this whole big giant retail building that I have in the city center? What are there any options as well? And of course, I mean, as a scholar at a university, I see fellow scholars and students reading this book as well, but in all of the above professions.
Yes. Well, again, thank you so much for giving your valuable time, sharing your knowledge with us. I would love that we finish this episode with you giving us 3 takeaway messages.
Yeah, that's, I should have thought of those 3, have a very good 3 ones, but let me give it a shot. So first of all, I think the main takeaway from my current research is how much our ground floors are changing. And for those of you that are ahead of the curve in knowing where change is headed and knowing what to do about this change, your cities will be more vibrant than ever before. So that is one. Change is happening. I call it the ground floor revolution is happening. And that's whether you want it or not. The second is, as I mentioned, flexibility. You have to be flexible in designing new buildings, in repurposing existing buildings, because change is not just happening once. Looking over history, change happens all the time. And I understand that is difficult for instance, developers, because being flexible usually means being, accommodating more functions, means spending more money up front, but your building over time will become valued and permanent. The third one is expanding our notion of resilience. Resilience, I very frequently see as environmental resilience, which is true, but I think we need to think broader of resilience to see also economic and social resilience as well. Is if we create an urban environment that could withstand change, that is so much, to me, more sustainable than being hyper-focused on one single use, because uses change so much over time. And this includes the resilience of our public spaces, making streets that are able to accommodate people living on them, people shopping on them, and now also people having a good time on them, sitting and having a beer or a cup of coffee as well on them. So resilient streetscapes as well. So I would take those as the three takeaways: flexibility, resilience, and revolution.
Wow, thank you so much. And so you really didn't prepare for this three takeaway messages, right?
No, just off the top of my head. I had a cup of coffee this morning, so yeah.
Lovely. So do you have a question for us? Because usually I ask a lot of questions, and now it's your time to ask us listeners a question, so we reflect.
Whew, that's a question to the listeners or to you. I mean, maybe just a rhetorical question to you as a listener would be, if you walk around your city and you experience your city at eye level, what are the trends that you see? What are stuff that you see closing? What are stuff that you see opening? And what are you going to do about this as an urbanist? Where do you think your power lies in changing this or in encouraging this? Where do you see the future of your city at eye level being? That would be a sort of a thought exercise.
Yeah, really interesting.
Yeah.
Thank you so much again. And so now tell me, apart from you doing research and drawing maps, what are your hobbies?
My hobbies are drawing maps. No. I've been asking about hobbies during COVID is such a difficult question, right? My hobbies, to be honest, it used to be travel, but travel's not that easy anymore. So I love exploring new places. I love traveling, both, by the way, in cities and in nature. I think there's very much a merit and a value to going outside of cities, just leaving city life behind and clearing the mind quite a bit as well. So that is certainly a hobby. But man, when's the last time I had time or how do we call it, permission for that hobby? I don't know.
Sorry.
Soon, I guess.
Lovely. So what is going to be your next step for you?
First steps first, let's finish this book. As I said, there's the book, Street Level Architecture. We are in the final stages still, kind of working through with the publisher, the book Street Life, Dynamics and Prospects for Urban Retail. So that's still on my plate as well. And as I said, a next step in my research, more and more coming up. I'm working on this special issue journal on the future of storefronts beyond retail, right? So what are non-retail uses that we can put in here? I love that, by the way, I'm able to put this in my educational work. I'm currently teaching a class in a neighborhood in Buffalo that looks at, okay, well, what can we do in all these empty storefronts that are not shops? Mostly meeting blank stares, like, what do you mean not shops? We're going to put it, no, let's think of other uses. To me, I see this as such a fascinating and underexplored question. I could see myself spending quite a bit of time over that over the next couple of years.
Yeah. Well, I wish you all the good luck.
Thank you very much. And thanks for having me as well.
My pleasure. So thank you so much, and hopefully talk to you soon, and maybe hopefully see you in Stockholm again.
I hope so too.
Yeah. Thank you.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Well, thank you so much for listening to Urbanistica podcast. I hope you really enjoyed this episode. You learned something new and also got inspired by the guest. Don't forget to share the episode on your social media and recommend it to people you think they are really interested in this topic. Thank you so much again for giving your valuable time to Urbanistica podcast. I am Mustafa Sharif. Keep up the good work. Keep loving cities.